Great Lakes Science Center. This is Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
All right, station, this is Great Lakes Science Center. How do you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear. Welcome aboard the International Space Station.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having us today. We have a very excited group to talk to the three of you today. We appreciate you making the time for us. And we have a whole bunch of students here to ask some questions, so I'm going to ask the first two to come up. And Scott, I think these two will be after your heart here. Hold on. Go ahead and introduce yourselves, guys, right there. Introduce yourselves.
I'm Connor Dudra. And I'm Ben Dudra. Our question is for Scott Kelly. We learned that you are a twin just like us, and your brother is Mark, also is an astronaut. How would your mom feel if you were both in space at the same time?
Well, I think my mother would be nervous, and my father too, and my grandmother, if we were both in space at the same time. However, you know, they would understand it, and of course they would have to live with it. You know, unfortunately, that's not going to happen now, though, because my brother's shuttle mission was delayed, so I'll be home before my brother launches. So that's something my mother or my parents, you know, are not going to have to worry about.
My name is Jeremy Sasak for Captain Coleman. Did Santa Claus bring you anything to the space station on Christmas?
Well, excitingly enough, when we woke up on Christmas morning, we all sleep in little cabins, and when we opened our doors, we each had a little tiny present tied on the outside of our doors, and it was chocolate, and actually for me, this tiny little bunny. And so we did have some presents from Santa Claus. It's hard to bring things to space, so I think he just brought little ones for us.
Hi, I'm Zachary Corkwell. My question is for Mr. Nespoli. What special Italian holiday items or food did you bring with you on the expedition?
Hi, Zachary. I think you like food because there's a food question here. So, yes, I actually did not bring much with me because, you know, we flew up here with this Russian spacecraft. It's very, very small. You cannot really bring much. So I did not bring anything because I knew we had plenty of stuff here. And in fact, we had Christmas dinner all together using some food items that are regular from the space station. And on top of that, the Russian actually gave us as a gift some little chocolate. So we had plenty of things to celebrate. Here are some of the items of food that we had.
My name is Brandon Weber, and my question is for Scott Kelly. What was your response when you were selected to be commander of Expedition 26?
Wow, that was some time ago. That was in 2007 after my last mission, and you know, this is a pretty big facility in space, the International Space Station, and it's a program that involves many different countries. So certainly a lot of responsibility. It's a real privilege to have this job. So it is also somewhat humbling to be able to serve in this capacity. So a little excitement, but also a little, I guess, humbled by the by asking to take this job.
I'm Danny Smerdell, and my question is for Ms. Coleman. What were some of the endurance and tolerance records you set well with the Air Force, and how have they helped you in your ISS experience?
In the Air Force, we were looking at new kinds of what we call G suits. They're special equipment that pilots wear that keep all the blood from going down from their head all the way down to their feet when they pull Gs. And I just happen to be pretty good at doing that. I think one of the things you learn when you do things like that are hard is that all you can do is do your best. And also, for me, it helps not to think about maybe running a whole race, doing something for a long time, but just doing it just for a minute now, and just for another minute, and just for another minute. So if some task seems really hard for you and it's long, I would just cut it into little pieces and try to do your best on each piece.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Dibkowski, and my question is for Scott Kelly. What is the most difficult thing about long-duration mission training as opposed to regular mission training?
Well, when you're training for a short duration mission on the space shuttle, most of your training takes place in Houston, Texas, at the Johnson Space Center. But because this is an international space station with modules that are built all over the world, our training takes place in different countries in Europe, mostly in Germany, Russia, Japan, Canada. So the most difficult part about it is associated with the travel to get to those places and the time spent away from home. In other words, missing family and friends, and the time change that you have to deal with when you're traveling over multiple time zones, and then getting up first thing Monday morning to train in a different location when you're really sleepy. That's those two things, missing family and friends and being tired because of the time changes, is what I think is the hardest.
My name is Michael Borowski, and my question is for Mr. Nespoli. You worked on the payload and crew support computer used on the Russian space station Mir. How old were you when you became interested in computers, and why?
Hi, Michael. Well, I actually bought one of the first computers that were put in the market in the early 80s. I think it was 1982. It was a very complicated little thing, very difficult to work, but it was fascinating. I mean, I think already then it was interesting to know and to see. You could see how these little machines could change our life, and I thought I should not miss out of it, so I bought into that, And that's it. I mean, I wanted to learn this because I felt that they were important, and in fact, they are extremely important.
Hello, my name is Ricky Gilmore, and my question is for Astronaut Kelly. You belong to the Society of Experimental Test Pilots. What kinds of experimental test flights have you done?
Ricky, That's a good question. I've been at NASA now for over 14 years, so it's been a while since I was doing experimental test flying. But some of the stuff I was involved with, I was the first pilot ever to fly an F-14 with a experimental digital flight control system installed in it, and did some what's called high angle of attack and departure testing. So trying to get the airplane into a spin or close to getting into a spin. I also did some testing trying to see how heavy we could launch an F-14 Tomcat off of an aircraft carrier, and that was pretty exciting too. So most of the test flying I did involved the F-14 Tomcat.
I am Michelle Blumen, and I have a question for astronaut Coleman. What exactly were you doing as Chief of Robotics for the astronaut office?
Well, I was in charge of robotics from an astronaut's point of view, and that means how the robotic arms operate and how we learn about how they operate. We have folks that teach us how to use the robotic arms, and we try to make sure that we know everything we need to know before we come up here and do our mission. For example, on this mission, the three of us will capture a Japanese supply ship called the HTV. And what will happen is it'll come up to the space station, it'll hover right outside, and then with the robotic arm controlled by Paolo and I, we will actually reach out and grab that supply ship and then stick it onto the space station. And so all the training that I learned in Houston on the robotic arm, I'll be using it for that task. And my job as the chief of robotics was to make sure that people like me, crew members training to get ready for space, were learning all the things they really needed to know in space. So we'll find out at the end of January how that worked.
My question is for Paolo Nespoli, and my name is Terrell Darrow. Growing up in Italy, what experiences convinced you to become an astronaut? And how old were you when you made the final decision?
That's an interesting question. I'm old enough to have witnessed live the first images that came down from the moon. And I remember watching these guys jumping around on the moon and thinking, wow, I really like that. I want to be also an astronaut when I grow up. But then, I grew up and I decided to actually try to pursue this career when I was 25. And this is when I really worked towards it. It took me many years before I eventually got selected as an astronaut, but it's possible, even for somebody coming from a small town in Italy.
My name is Gavin McDonough, and my question is for Scott Kelly. How will you celebrate your birthday on February 21st on the International Space Station?
Well, Gavin, I'm sure we'll have maybe a little celebration. That day actually is a day where we have a Russian spacewalk going on. And because where my Soyuz, my return ship, is located, during that spacewalk, I have to be isolated in one of the smaller Russian segment modules the whole time. So for about 12 hours on my birthday, I'll be locked up in this module with one of the other cosmonauts. And the reason we do that is in case we have to come back in an emergency, we're not isolated from our return vehicle. So most of the time, not too much celebrating, a lot of waiting for the spacewalk to be over.
My name is Marissa Rotino. My question is for Catherine Coleman. How did you train for long-duration flight on the International Space Station?
What we do is there's people that have thought about everything that astronauts need to learn in order to live and work and do science experiments on the space station. And some of those things we learn in the United States. Some of those things we learn in Russia. We also do training, which is very much like school. We go to class just like you do. We learn things. We have tests just like you do. And so we do those things also in Japan and in Europe, because there's a whole group of 16 different countries that have made our space station, and we try to make sure that we understand how to operate each of their different parts of the space station. So I've been spending the last 2.5 years learning all those things, and it's pretty exciting to be up here actually putting all that knowledge to work.
My name is Timothy Williamson, and I have a question for Mr. Nespoli. Does scuba diving remind you of space? If so, how?
Timothy, actually, yes. When I float around here and I'm hanging like this, it reminds me a lot about scuba diving. Actually, when I push and I fly, it reminds me when sometimes I was underwater flying over coral reefs or nice places. Though there are some differences. You can in the water you can actually push over the water and you can avoid objects or spin around. But if you try to do that here in space, it doesn't work. So you have to be really careful, because if you're not careful here, you go and slam against the walls and you do a lot of damages.
My name is Ryan Dellery, and I am asking a question for Scott Kelly. How do you breathe in your spacesuit if it's closed shut, and what happens when your pack runs out of air?
Well, in the spacesuit that we do spacewalks in, the big white one you see, we have oxygen tanks that supply us with oxygen, and when those run out, if they were to run out, and hopefully they never will, we have a spare oxygen tank that'll give us just enough time to get back into the airlock and get hooked up to another oxygen hose that's connected to the space station. And hopefully that'll never happen. We have a lot of very smart people on the ground that watch how much oxygen we have, as well as other things that support our life in the spacesuit. And we haven't had to use it yet. But if you ever did run out of air in the spacesuit, or oxygen to breathe in the spacesuit or anywhere else, you wouldn't live very long. But we make sure that doesn't happen.
My name is Rand Singer, and my question is for Catherine Coleman. How long did it take you to build up your great strength and endurance, and how do you keep it?
Well, I don't know if it's great, but the only way to build strength and endurance is to work at it just about every single day. And when you stop, you start losing strength and endurance. Up here on the space station, because we don't, walk around on our feet or use our big muscles just for moving around in life, we actually lose bone. Our bone actually dissolves a little bit, and we lose muscles if we don't exercise. So we exercise almost 2 hours every single day. We do aerobic exercise for our hearts, and we do weightlifting exercises, although we use a different system because, of course, our weights would be weightless.
Well, we want to thank you from the Great Lakes Science Center and the NASA Glenn Research Visitor Center for your time today. And we'll be waving at 6:13 Eastern tonight when you fly over. So wave back, please.
Well, we'll try to wave back, and all those were very great questions, and we appreciate you guys coming on board today and joining us on the International Space Station.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Great Lakes Science Center. Station, we are now resuming operational communications.